Everyone knows the Milgram experiment. The shocks, the lab coat, the 65%. Almost no one knows he ran it 24 different ways, and that just by moving the victim into the same room or letting one other person say no, he could make that 65% collapse to almost nothing. The experiment didn't prove that we obey. It proved something we're much less comfortable with: how easily that number can be built. And 6 of those 24 versions, he never published at all. So let's talk about the number you were taught and the ones you weren't. 1961, Yale University. Stanley Milgram wants an answer to a question the Second World War had made unbearable. Will an ordinary person hurt a stranger badly simply because someone in charge told them to? It isn't an abstract question that year. As Milgram sets up his lab, Adolf Eichmann is on trial in Jerusalem, and the whole world is listening to a man explain that he was no monster. He was just following orders. Milgram wants to know whether that's an excuse or a description of almost everyone. So he builds a machine, 30 switches in a row, 15 volts to 450. The labels climbing from slight shock up to danger, severe shock. And then at the very end, just 3 letters: X, X, X. The subject plays the teacher. Every time the man in the next room gets a word pair wrong, the teacher throws the next switch up the line. The learner grunts, then protests, then screams, then pounds on the wall, and then goes horribly quiet. None of it is real. The learner is an actor. The switches do nothing. But the teacher has no way of knowing that. Before running it, Milgram asked a panel of psychiatrists how many people would go all the way to the end. Their answer? Maybe 1 in 1,000. You'd have to be a sadist. 26 of his first 40 subjects went to the end. 65%. The number detonated. It became the closest thing social psychology has to a law of nature. Proof that the horror wasn't German. It was human. That any of us, handed the right orders, would throw the last switch. It has been in essentially every introductory textbook since.
Here's the first thing those textbooks tend to skip. 65% wasn't the result. It was the result of one version, the baseline, out of roughly 24 Milgram went on to run. And the versions did not agree with each other. The psychologist Gina Perry spent years inside the Yale archive, listening to the original session recordings and reading Milgram's own notes for a book called Behind the Shock Machine. What she found wasn't fraud. It was quieter than that. Milgram had a headline he believed in, and he pushed the versions that backed it to the front, while the versions that undercut it got less attention, or none. 18 conditions made it into his 1974 book. 6 never appeared anywhere. She found something else on the tapes. The experimenter was supposed to deliver 4 fixed prods. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue, and then stop. On the recordings, he doesn't stop. He improvises. He pressures, cajoles, pushes people well past the script. The obedience wasn't only measured. In places, it was coaxed. Listen to the tapes and the tidy science dissolves. You hear subjects laughing from sheer stress, arguing, pleading to stop, and the experimenter, flat and unmoved, repeating that they have no choice but to continue. It doesn't sound like a measurement. It sounds like a man being worn down. So the famous number isn't a lie. It's a highlight reel.
Now turn the other versions back on and watch the number move. Take the learner out of the distant room and put him in the same room as the teacher. Visible, not just audible. And obedience falls from 65 to 40%. Make the teacher physically hold the man's hand down onto a shock plate, and it drops to 30. Pull the experimenter out of the room So the orders arrive by telephone, and it collapses to around 20, with subjects quietly lying about which switch they'd actually thrown. Then push it the other way. Let the teacher only read the words, while someone else throws the switch, one step removed from the act, and obedience climbs to 92%. And in the version where the subject first watched 2 other teachers refuse and walk out, just 1 in 10 kept going. And it wasn't only distance. Milgram moved the entire experiment off campus into a rundown office suite in downtown Bridgeport under the name of a company nobody had heard of, with Yale's name stripped clean off the door. Same script, same machine. Obedience fell to 47%. The prestige of the building was itself one of the dials.
Same machine, same species. The number ranged from 92% down to almost nothing. And the thing that changed each time wasn't the people. It was the room. That's the actual finding. Not that humans obey. That obedience is a dial, and the situation is the hand turning it.
There's one more thread, and it's the one to handle carefully. Not every subject believed the shocks were real. Perry found people who said afterward that they'd sensed the whole thing was staged, that no serious lab would really let a volunteer electrocute a man over a memory test. How many? We don't reliably know, so distrust anyone who tells you most of them saw through it. But it's enough to muddy the tidy picture. Some were certain they were causing agony. Some suspected. Some were performing for the man in the coat. The switch doesn't record which one you were.
So, is the whole thing a myth? No. And this is exactly where the debunking overshoots. In 2009, the psychologist Jerry Berger reran a careful, ethical version of the baseline, stopping at the last safe threshold instead of going past it, and got obedience in the same range Milgram did. The effect is real. People will do this. And when you average obedience across the conditions that can honestly be compared, a 2014 synthesis in Perspectives on Psychological Science pooled 21 of them, more than 700 subjects. The number that comes out isn't 65%. It's about 44. Lower than the legend? Still far too high to be comfortable.
So the number was never the discovery. The number was a choice. One reading, off one setting, from a machine with 24 settings, printed as though it were the only one. What Milgram really built wasn't proof that you'd obey. It was a bank of dials. Distance, authority, permission, who else is in the room, that quietly decide how far a normal person will go. He found the dials. Then he mostly showed you the single reading that made the cleanest headline. The comforting story is that we're monsters underneath, one lab coat away from the worst thing we're capable of. The real one is stranger and much harder to file away. You are not a fixed percentage. You are close to whatever the room is built to make you, and someone is always building the room. 65% was never a fact about people. It was a fact about the room they were standing in.